Hi, Devin. A devastating wildfire has engulfed in the northeastern side of the country, and I'm right here at the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures headquarters in Gosong to get the latest update. Over the night, the fire spread to 18 different sites, burning around 380 hectares of forest so far and destroying at least 300 houses and buildings. The authorities are trying to figure out the exact cause of the fire, but as far as we know right now, it might have been a spark from electrical wires. The fire quickly spread throughout the region, fanned by strong winds and dry air, affecting Gosong, where I am, as well as Inje, Sokcho, and Gangneung. The main fire near Gosong and Sokcho was put out at around 9:40 in the morning, and 80% of fire in Inje has been extinguished. But they're having some trouble in Gangneung, and that's why most of the helicopters have headed there, except for the 4 remaining right here.
Right, a lot of resources deployed there, including those helicopters. Give us a better idea of the scale of the effort there in Gangwon-do.
Sure. Just a few hours ago, Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon had visited the site right here to inspect the situation and to take all-out measures to put out the fire. This is the biggest firefighting force that Korea's ever deployed. The headquarters of all major regions have sent fire trucks, specifically half of the available forces of Seoul, Incheon, Daejeon, Gyeonggi-do provinces and other regions, and a third of the forces of Busan, Ulsan, South Jeollado province and other areas as well. The fire agency issued a top-level alert, which is for fires that affect the entire nation, reflecting the seriousness of the situation. But people in the area have been told to evacuate to nearby shelters as soon as possible due to the strong winds and the fires that are still burning. Back to you, Devin.
All right, Won Jung-hwan reporting live there from Gosong. And as we heard from Jung-hwan, one of the areas still threatened by the fire is Gangneung, and we have our Seo Bo-bin standing by there. Bo-bin, what's happening where you are?
Hi, Devin. I'm out in Gangneung, Gangwon-do province, one of the places affected by the massive wildfire. As of right now, about 80% of the fire in Gangneung has been extinguished, but as you can see behind me, there's still some smoke left as the fire isn't completely out. The first fire broke out Thursday evening in Gosong County in Gangwon-do province and spread down the east coast to Gangneung, where I am right now. Since the fire hit Gangneung late last night, more than 120 hectares of forest have been burned, with more than 120 houses destroyed by the fire, and some 59 mobile base stations were burnt. Currently, there are reports of 1 dead and 1 injured. More than 4,200 people were evacuated, but as the big fires were extinguished, more than 3,800 people have returned to their homes. More than 47 schools in Gangwon-do province have also been closed. The total damage is still unknown and will only become clear once the fire has been completely extinguished. I will give you more updates in our later newscast, Devin.
All right, thanks for that. Seo Bo-bin, and we can hear the helicopters getting closer to where she is there on the site. In the meantime, South Korea's prime minister has gone to the region himself. President Moon Jae-in has ordered his officials to do everything they can to contain the fire. Our presidential office correspondent joins us now with the latest. That's Shin Se-min. Se-min, what's the government doing to get this situation under control?
Right. For one, the presidential office is getting the minute-by-minute update as we speak. President Moon Jae-in, for one, had revisited the Crisis Management Center earlier this morning at around 11 a.m. for an update, and that's where he also ordered his officials to use all means possible to contain the fire happening in Gangwon-do province. Now, also during a video conference, President Moon ordered with officials there officials on site to make sure that all the little fires are completely put out and ordered to review of the extent of the damage to potentially designate the affected areas as special disaster zones. Now, the president's been keeping a close eye on the fire since late last night. He held his first emergency meeting in the wee hours of this morning, shortly after the clock struck midnight. Now, this is him earlier this morning at an emergency meeting. Listen to this.
특히 진화 과정에서 진화 작업에 동원되는 소방관 등에게 안전사고가 발생하지 않도록 각별히 유의해 주시기 바랍니다. 각 지자체가 중심이 되어서 인명피해가 발생하지 않도록 산불이 번질 지역이 있는 지역은 주민 대피 등 적극적이고 선제적인 조치를 취해 주시기 바랍니다.
And right, as does Devin, you've said Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon has been at the scene since this morning, shortly after he held an emergency meeting with related ministries. Now, the government this morning declared a national disaster because of damage piling up to what authorities have called an unprecedented extent. Now, that means those living in the region will be entitled to special government support. Devin?
Simeon, there are many aspects of this fire that the government has to deal with, the safety of people in the area, of course, but also military issues because it's near the border. So what are the different ministries and agencies doing?
Right, at the center of the crisis here is the different ministries, including the Interior and Safety, the Defense, and the Fire Department. For one, the Interior and Safety Ministry is giving the latest assessment of the disaster zone as the day goes on, and the Defense Ministry also has given its latest, saying that as of 1 p.m. this afternoon, at least 30 military aircraft and some 6,700 military personnel to the site have been dispatched to the site, that is, to try and put out the fire. An additional 14,000 military personnel are also standing by. At the Unification Ministry, they're also involved because the fire, as you have said, is so close to the border with North Korea. Officials say that they have already informed the North via the Kaesong Inter-Korean Joint Liaison Office this morning, and they were told in response by the North Koreans that they will report to their superiors. Devin?
All right, Shin Se-min, thanks so much for that. And dry weather and high winds have contributed to the forest fire in Gangwon-do. So let's get an update on the weather from our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle?
The whole country is under a dry weather advisory, and on the East Coast, it's been upgraded to warnings. In conditions like these, even a very small amber can lead to big fire. Now, in Gangwon-do province, where the forest fires are burning, the wind is weaker than it was this morning, but it's still under a high wind advisory. Now, there's a strong northwesterly wind of 14 to 20 meters per second, at least until 6 p.m. Korea time. And luckily, occasional showers are expected this weekend, so hopefully those will relieve some of the dryness. And on Saturday, rain will wet the central areas and Gyeongsang-Bukdo province, and it will move down to the southern regions by Sunday. Now, it won't be much rain though, so it'll still be somewhat dry, especially in the east, which will get up to less than 5 millimeters. Back to you, Devin.
South Korea's National Assembly has ratified a deal with the U.S. on sharing defense costs. Under the agreement approved Friday, Seoul will contribute roughly $915 million this year to help cover the expense of stationing American troops on the peninsula. The new deal only covers 2019, and Seoul's share is up 8.2% from the year before. Rival lawmakers also passed more than 100 pending bills, including a revision to the National Assembly law that will require Parliament's standing committees to deliberate on bills on a regular basis. That revision comes amid criticism that the National Assembly is unproductive, especially at times of political tension. Also passed was a resolution urging Japan to correct its school textbooks that had made false claims about Korea's easternmost islets of Dokdo. There's been speculation that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un might visit Russia in the next few months. In the meantime, Russia and the U.S. have held their own meeting on North Korea issues. Lee Ji-won has more.
U.S. Ambassador to Russia John Huntsman and Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Igor Morgulov met on Wednesday, where they discussed coordination of efforts to resolve the Korean Peninsula issues. Russia's foreign ministry announced a meeting but did not give any more details on the specific agenda. Their meeting comes at the request of Washington's diplomat amid growing speculation about a possible Pyongyang-Moscow summit. Ever since Hanoi, North Korea and Russia have been increasing their exchanges, with officials traveling between the countries, including North Korean Protocol Chief Kim Chang-sun's visit to Moscow last month. It's expected that Ambassador Huntsman was updated on the details of a possible Kim-Putin summit, while also seeking Russia's cooperation in helping Washington resume denuclearization talks with the North. The two sides have been at a standstill since the Hanoi summit collapsed in February, with North Korea wanting a phased dismantlement of its nuclear program in exchange for the partial removal of sanctions at each step, while the U.S. is asking Pyongyang to take concrete denuclearization steps and provide an overall roadmap in exchange for sanctions relief. Now another Washington-Moscow meeting is coming up, as Deputy Foreign Minister Morgulov announced that Washington's nuclear envoy Stephen Biegun will be visiting the country sometime in April. This is a reciprocal visit to Morgulov's trip to Washington in late January. During his meetings with counterparts from around the world after the Hanoi summit, Biegun has been stressing the need for the international community to continue implementing sanctions on the North. But with U.S. President Donald Trump repeatedly softening his tone on new sanctions on the regime, it remains to be seen if Biegun will push the need for sanctions and pressure when he meets Morgulov later this month. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics has released its preliminary earnings guidance today, and it shows that both revenue and earnings have plunged. Kim Hae-sung reports.
Samsung Electronics says its first quarter operating profit fell 60% on year, its biggest drop in operating profit in 4 years. According to the company's preliminary results released Friday, operating income for the January to March period slid to $5.5 billion. Sales fell 14% on year to around $46 billion. The announcement comes after the tech giant had issued a warning last month that its earnings would be lower than market expectations, citing falling chip prices and lower demand for its display panels. Samsung saw record sales and profits last year, but falling global demand for memory chips on weakening demand from China and data center companies like Amazon and Microsoft has hurt its profits. Data by research firm DRAM Exchange shows both DRAM and NAND flash chip prices dropped by over 20% in the first quarter. For its display division, Samsung has said that LCD panel prices fell more than expected due to an expansion in capacity from Chinese makers, while demand from its flexible OLED display screens used for iPhones also declined. Full earnings data for each of its divisions is due to be released later this month. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
It's Friday afternoon, so that means it's time for an in-depth look at the market action today and for the week. And for that, I'm joined by Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Thanks for your time today, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon, Devin.
So this week we have the huge decline in earnings at Samsung Electronics, which, for better or worse, it's a company that is an overwhelming force in the Korean equities market. Profits at Samsung down an astounding 60%, sales down too. And the other big chip maker, SK Hynix, probably similar. Both of these companies, a huge part of Korea's exports. So what caused this decline, and what do you see happening in the second quarter?
Well, actually, Samsung Electronics sales and profit decline has been pretty much expected from the end of last year, 2018, because there has been a increasing excess supply of memory chips and display gadgets in the international market. So, but one thing very interesting for today's equity market in South Korea is foreign investors are still purchasing SK Hynix and Samsung Electronics stocks because they have pretty positive views on Samsung's sales and profit in the future. Actually, it has been released that recently that the third largest provider of the memory chips, which is Micron from the United States, decided to cut their memory chip production over 20%. So I believe that from the second quarter of this year, the excess supply of the memory chip is pretty much weakened. So that will give more momentum on Samsung's and SK Hynix business for this year.
Yeah, it sounds like investors agree with you. Shares of Samsung and SK Hynix doing okay this week.
Right.
But now Korea's exports in March, this is related, they were down 8% from a year earlier, and now there's talk about the current account falling into a deficit in April for the first time in 7 years. Is this situation turning into an export crisis?
Well, actually, I don't think so about the export crisis, because it is true that export is declining over the 4 straight months from the December of last year in South Korea, but the import is also declining faster than that of the export. So the Korean economy is still maintaining a trade surplus until now. But the main reason for declining export is pretty much related to the Samsung and SK Hynix a memory chip export decrease. And at the same time, Chinese economy is slowing down due to the trade conflict with United States. So I believe the major reason for declining export of the South Korea is indirectly and directly both related to the China and U.S. Trade conflicts, which is still going on.
Sure, yeah. We've been watching that for weeks and weeks now. And let's talk more about the U.S.-China trade talks. Reports are saying that there's a deal in the works that would get China to make several big commitments by the year 2025. What do you think's in the agreement, and what issues are they still working on?
Well, with the fact that Mr. Trump decided to meet Mr. Ryu, who is the trade negotiation representative from Chinese government on April 4th, indicates that they have a certain level of tentative agreement between the two parties. So the key issue between the two countries is the intellectual property and technological transfer between the two countries. So if China accept these two items in trade negotiations, that will generate really structural changes in China. So that means Chinese corporations should keep all the intellectual property regulations and laws and so on. And on the Chinese government side, they are pursuing one-shot package settlement with the United States, like they will be decreasing all trade surplus with the United States down to zero until 2025. But on the U.S. side, they'd like to maintain the tariffs as a leverage on Chinese failure or keeping the agreement between the two countries. So there will be more talk and more conflicts between the two countries on getting rid of the tariffs that has been imposed to each other in the last year.
Got it. So it's not over yet. Well, we'll have to leave it there today, Dr. Kim. Thanks for your insights today, as always.
Well, thank you very much.
Now, during their trade talks in Washington, China and the U.S. reportedly agreed on trade pledges, but suggested different timetables for implementing them. Kim Da-mi has an update on the situation.
The United States has reportedly set a target date of 2025 for China to fulfill its trade pledges, as the two countries kicked off a fresh round of negotiations in Washington on Wednesday local time. According to Bloomberg on Wednesday, the proposed pledges include purchasing more U.S. commodities such as soybeans and allowing 100% foreign ownership for U.S. companies operating in China. While the U.S. reportedly noted possible retaliation against China if the pledges are not kept, China supposedly suggested 2029 to fulfill the pledges. In hopes of hammering out a comprehensive agreement to bring an end to the trade war, U.S. President Donald Trump will meet Chinese Vice Premier Liu He at the White House on Thursday local time. The Chinese Vice Premier is in Washington for trade talks with U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer this week, following last week's talks in Beijing. After the Beijing talks, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow said the trade negotiations were progressing and they hope to get closer to a deal this week. Kudlow added they made good headway in Beijing last week, where China acknowledged the problems of intellectual property theft, forced technology transfer, and hacking for the first time. If the talks are successful, Presidents Trump and Xi may get together to sign a final agreement to end their protected tariff dispute. And people familiar with the plan said the meeting date between Trump and Xi could be announced as early as Thursday. 김다미, Arirang News.
People around the world are living longer now, especially people in Africa, thanks to the country's efforts to fight AIDS and other infectious diseases. There's still a huge gap, though, in life expectancies in developed countries versus developing countries. Our Cha Sang-mi has this report.
Global life expectancy jumped by 5.5 years between 2000 and 2016, yet unequal income and access to healthcare means many will have far shorter lives. The World Health Organization says that on average, a child born in 2016 is expected to live 72 years, up from 66.5 years in 2000. The UN Health Agency says the African region saw the greatest rise during the time, where life expectancy increased by 10.3 years to 61.2 years. The WHO attributed the rise to dramatic drops in death rates among children under 5, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where advances have been made against HIV and AIDS through expanded access to antiretrovirals, and where there has been reduction in other communicable diseases such as measles. This is the fastest increase in life expectancy since the 1960s, as the world reversed the declines of the 1990s when life expectancy fell in Africa due to the AIDS epidemic and in Eastern Europe following the collapse of the Soviet Union. But despite progress in poorer countries, the WHO said life expectancy gaps are significant, with people from low-income countries living 18 less years on average than those in high-income countries. The agency also shed light on significant gender differences in life expectancy worldwide. Girls born in 2016 can expect to live to over 74, while boys on average won't quite reach 70, according to the annual report. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Today, April 5th, is Arbor Day in South Korea, a day set aside once a year to promote forestation. The South Korean government is doing its part by helping to create greener landscapes in Mongolia. Choi Si-young explains what the government's doing and why.
Planting trees to reduce the concentration of yellow dust in Mongolia's vast central deserts to prevent that dust blowing to South Korea and darkening the sky. That's what the Korea International Cooperation Agency aims to achieve through its forestation projects in Mongolia. Yellow dust is made up of dry soil particles blown over from Mongolia and northern China to South Korea. South Korea's weather agency says that between 2002 and 2014, out of the 114 sandstorms that hit the Korean peninsula, 92 originated from Mongolia.
Almost 78% of Mongolia's landmass is desert, which negatively affects South Korea due to the yellow dust that it produces. To reduce the amount of dust particles blowing in, we think forestation in Mongolia is necessary.
Since December last year, the South Korean government, joined by a local NGO, Green Asia Network, has been planting trees in central Mongolia to prevent further desertification. The goal is to plant around 100,000 trees. The South Korean government says the forestation projects help people in Mongolia too, because locals will also benefit from cleaner air and they can sell fruit produced by the trees, creating a new source of income. The agency plans to run the forestation projects until 2021 and expand them to help other countries struggling with similar issues. Choi Si-young, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thanks for being with us. More live news coming up at 7 p.m. Korea time. Bye for now.